Hello, I'm Barry Tomalin. I'm talking to Richard Neergaard, artist extraordinary. He has the ability to take what seem to be different parts of things and create wonderful artworks. So Richard, welcome. Delighted to have the opportunity of talking to you about this. Tell me, first of all, how do you describe your artwork?
Well, Barry, this is called multimedia. So it includes a variety of different kinds of media. So you have paint. In this case, it's called pour painting. Then you have three-dimensional car parts. So these are original parts. And in some of my other pieces, I have neon lighting, I have aluminum, I have other components. So it's not one single piece, and that makes it multimedia. In this case, exotic car art multimedia.
Wonderful, exotic car art. That's a wonderful description of it. So tell me, how did you get started?
Well, I've always been a petrol head, since I was a little kid. And when I was younger, I was racing cars. I was always building cars. I loved cars. I've stayed doing track days, for a long time. I still like sports cars. And one day when I was at a McLaren dealer, I saw the mechanic throwing away absolutely beautiful pieces off of McLaren that had little scratches in them, so they had replaced them. And each piece off a car like that is a work of art in itself. So they had carbon fiber pieces, gorgeous, aluminum pieces, all machined and beautiful, and they wanted to throw them away. So I asked to take them. I said, these can't be thrown away. These must be on a wall. These must be, in a piece of art. And I just gathered them together and made my first piece, and that turned out kind of nice. So then I thought maybe I could do more of these. And through my connections with racing, I had friends who had race shops. And when they saw my art, they said, "Oh, we'd like to give you some old pieces. They're unusable, but they're still beautiful. They can be restored. They can be used." And so I got a room full of car parts and got started.
And do you just take the car parts as they are, or do you change them in any way?
Usually I'll have to restore them because they're often parts that were sitting dusty in a box if they're from classic cars, for 20 or 30 years. If they're from exotic cars, sometimes they're damaged. So I do a little restoration. I've made a few pieces where I manipulate them a little bit. The first McLaren piece, I cut two pieces and fit them into each other. But generally, I try to tell the story with the complete car part and then the art around it.
Great. Now, the artwork, the multimedia artwork that we're looking at behind you has the, what do we call it, the radiator of an Austin car. Is that correct? This is
actually a Ford,
a Ford car.
Model A Ford.
A Model A Ford. Okay,
Yes.
Tell us about it.
So this is part of a series. So what I wanted to do was capture the greatest founders of car companies, the most iconic, most dynamic in the world, and clearly one of them was Henry Ford. So he tried to make mass production on a scale that was perfectly efficient. And to do that, he offered one model only. So his most famous expression was any color as long as it's black, so he could get efficiency on the line. So in the case of Henry Ford, where you see his signature down here, I've tried to take the most iconic elements of him and his company to capture the equity. So clearly the Model A Ford grille represents him. It's 1931. I actually bought it on eBay at a junkyard and had to restore it. It's an original. And then, I integrated it into what's his expression, as well as clearly the color black, to represent, what he brought to the automotive world.
And you also have something which is quite remarkable, which is, I think, a James Bond.
Yes.
DB5 car, Aston Martin?
Exactly. So in this case, a friend of mine gave me a damaged old British race car backside, which was a Turner Mark III from 1963. It was no longer usable because it had been in too many accidents. So he said, do something with it. It's collecting dust. I cut it down, and when I did, I noticed it had almost the identical shape in back as a DB5 Aston Martin, which is worth, now millions of pounds. and it's famous from James Bond. So I thought I'll make a nice theme, you know, with James Bond. So I've completely restored it. I actually had it painted in Aston Martin's color. They have an official color called James Bond Silver Birch. And then I had the license plate, the emblem, and all the historic components put into it. And I've mounted it inside a sunken polished wooden frame. And I've put cut in half martini glasses, sort of ascending to represent James Bond. And the piece is called Shaken, Not Stirred. And this was sold at Bonham's Aston Martin Classic Car Auction.
Now, I can see the word Ferrari on this piece of artwork. So, Richard, tell us about it.
Well, again, in terms of the Founder series, Enzo Ferrari was one of the greats. So I've tried to represent the equity and the dynamism of Enzo Ferrari. So, for example, his favorite expression was, "What's behind you does not matter." And of course, red is the iconic Ferrari color. And this piece looks much more dynamic because Ferrari is about, you know, blasting through the roads. And so it's a lot more vibrant and a lot more violent, let's say, than the Ford piece. It contains on the back an original racing manual from an old Ferrari race car. And then it has a valve cover off a Ferrari engine, a more modern one. And so this captures in total, let's say, the whole values and equity of Ferrari.
Why did you choose valve covers?
Because they're branded and because they're pretty. You know, I need parts where people can identify with them. So ideally they have a branding on them, but they should always be something machined, beautiful, iconic. This piece happens to be red and is branded. So it works perfectly for an art piece. Anybody can recognize it, and then from that recognize why the rest of the art looks the way it does and ties into the piece.
And you have the signature of Enzo Ferrari, am I right?
That's
down
correct.
The bottom there?
Yeah, down at the bottom here.
Okay, thank you. So now then, if we move on to the other two that you have in the series, tell us a little bit more about those.
So the most beautiful is, of course, Rolls-Royce. And this is one of the most iconic brands in the world. And the grille is the icon of Rolls-Royce. So I was obliged in this Founder series to include a Rolls-Royce grille. And the great car manufacturer that's being represented is Sir Henry Royce. And he had an expression, his favorite expression was, "Small things make perfection, but perfection is no small thing." And then the most iconic element of Rolls-Royce is what they call the Spirit of Ecstasy, this little angel that sits atop the radiator grille. And so what I've done is taken the Spirit of Ecstasy and had the spirit actually on the painting climb up from behind the grille and join together as kind of smoke and become the angel in an almost galaxy-like manner. So it looks like stars joining together and turning into the angel.
Great, thank you very much.
Pleasure.